Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you to T.R. Miller High School. My name is Ron Snell, and I have the great pleasure of being the principal of this great establishment. It's to start today, I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Marcia Rollerson. She is a local pediatrician, has taken care of many of you when you're sick. She's been here since 1980. She's the former president of the Medical Association of Alabama, one of the first two women who held that high office in the 200 years. And she is a part currently, and this is the important part in terms of why we're here today, of the Community of Transformation. And that's an organization that has brought us Miss Huntley, and we couldn't be more proud and thankful for that. And so without further ado, Dr. Robertson.
Thank you so very much, and it's really great to see so many young people here today and so many leaders from our community. About 3.5 years ago, I was asked by the then Methodist minister in Brewton to come to a group called Communities of Transformation. And what we started reading about was how to make Brewton, Escambia County, a place where everyone can thrive and where there's no more poverty. We first studied a book called When Helping Hurts, and it was a pretty scholarly book. We thought we got a lot out of it. But then we also studied this book, More Than a Bird, written by Liz Huntley. Before Liz comes to speak, I would like to introduce our mayor, Yank Lovelace, who's going to come up and present Liz with an award. We are very fortunate in Brewton to have a mayor who truly cares about our community, cares about the children who are here, and cares for even the least of these. Thank you, Mayor.
Good afternoon. You know, before I make this presentation to Liz, I sort of want to give a little background of how I sort of got involved with this. My classmate, one of Liz's teachers, is Pam Hill, now Pam Jones, and I hate to say it was our 40th class reunion, and we were talking, and Pam related to our fellow classmates Liz's whole story, which I found quite remarkable. So a few years, 2, 3, 4 years pass, and I'm at church supper one night, and Charles Rushing comes up to me, and he had just read the book, I guess, and he wanted to see if I could get Liz to come to Brewton to speak. And you know, if you're the mayor and you travel around a lot and you meet a lot of people, I'm sort of confused in my mind, because I don't know the story had I met Liz, and I've been in some class with her, because her story had stuck with me so very deeply and touched me. And so I told him, sure, I would try to do that. So I started trying to get in touch with Liz, and then Pam and I are exchanging messages on Messenger with Facebook, and then I get a call from Dr. Rawson. She's in Birmingham, and she's lined up Liz to come, which is great. And Carol Gordy gets involved. Carol wants to furnish books to the teachers to read. So I think it shows that you've got a speaker this afternoon whose story and life has touched a lot of people. So if I could ask Liz to come forward a moment. Liz, on behalf of the City of Brewton, it was a great deal of pleasure. I present you as key to the City of Brewton. Congratulations.
key working the bank vaults? Just, you know, wouldn't that be nice, right? Before I get started, this is something I did this morning, and it is important to me because not just for you young people, but for the adults that are in the audience as well. Traveling with me today, I spoke earlier this morning to a statewide conference of school administrators down in Orange Beach, and it worked out for me to make my stop through here on my way back home to Clanton. And I have my 14-year-old, about to be 15-year-old daughter with me, Sarah Beth, who I would just like for her to come up and introduce herself, and I will tell you why in a minute. Come up, Sarah Beth.
Hi. My name is Sarah Beth Huntley, and I'm a freshman at Chilton County High School, and I'm involved in multiple extracurriculars at the school, including my varsity tennis team and Junior Varsity Scholars Bowl, Student Government Association, and I'm vice president of my drama club. And I also play piano and write outside of school. And I just wanted to thank you guys for having me and my mom here today.
The reason I wanted Sarah Beth to get up and talk to you all and talk about what she's doing now know this at the very outset. Whenever I'm talking about something and I'm promoting it and I'm excited about it, and it may sound like I'm bragging, but what I'm really doing is I'm boasting in God. Because I truly believe that everything that's ever happened to me has been because God touched somebody's heart to reach and help me. And even with my children. Now, you heard a little bit, and I'm going to talk a little more about my background, but a background like that makes it very difficult to have anything to draw from when you're wanting to parent your children. It's tough, because you're kind of an unparented parent, you know, and you're trying to figure this thing out. And through the help of so many friends, loved ones, and my church, you know, I think my kids have turned out okay. And I'm really proud of that, and I'm thankful to God for that. And it's also an example, as you're talking about addressing poverty, when you break the cycle of poverty like the cycle was broken for me, this is the end result. The end result is now their child's going to be successful and their children's going to be successful. That's what we mean by breaking the cycle of poverty. You get a whole different mindset of people that are going to seek out education opportunity and economic opportunity to be productive citizens, and they're going to make sure that their children are the same way, as opposed to going down bad paths. So I thought it was important. Marcia had originally asked me to bring my older daughter here, and she had another commitment today and couldn't be here. And I thought, you know, I'm going to bring Sarah Beth. She's a high school student. She can get up and talk. She even had a nice young gentleman to help her down the steps. I mean, that worked out well. So I wanted to show her as an example of what God can do. And how he can impact the life, not just the direct life that he's working through like he did with mine, but for generations to come, what that means. So that's how you break the cycle of poverty. You fix it for some, and the rest of it will take care of itself, because they now have the tools to know what they need to do. Now, you heard a little bit about my story, and I assume it's piqued some of your interest in that you want to know more, and several of you in the audience have read my book. And I will say for the kids in high school, I always, whenever I come to a school, I always leave several copies in the library. So if any of you are interested in wanting to read the book, it'll be available to you in the library if you want to do so. And if you want to get your own copy, you can do that too, but at least you know it'll be there in the library and you can read it. And my story is really one of hope, is one of resilience, is one of faith, and it's one of love, most of all, because love covers all of that. And I'm going to kind of walk you through some of those things to give you some demonstrations of how. And what I hope happens at the end of this presentation is that any of you out there, young people or adult people, that are sitting around on your crybaby horse, and that's what I call it, and you're wallowing in whatever's going on with you because you feel like you've been dealt a bad hand, that things aren't good for me, my family situation's not good for me, you know, why am I in this situation where we don't have any money to be able to do things, blah, 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 blah. I hear it all the time. Well, I'm living proof that you really have no excuse. It's up to you to decide what you want to do with your life. Now, I will say this, that it is unfortunate for any one of you sitting out there if you're in a terrible home situation. Nobody's heart can go out to you stronger than mine. And it's not right. It's not right when adults don't take responsibility for what they're supposed to do. It is not right when adults abuse children. It is not right when adults neglect children. It is not right when adults put other things in front of their kids instead of making them a priority. And if that is going on in your life, I am so sorry. But know that it is not your fault. You did nothing wrong. That's that adult's problem. And what I want you to hear from me today is I want you to hear about the opportunities that I took advantage of growing up in spite of my horrible childhood and everything that was going on in my house, because I decided somewhere along the way, I didn't really know at the beginning what it was about, but God revealed it to me, that at the end of the day, you're in control. At the end of the day, you get to define who you want to be as an adult. You know, I remember coming to a realization one time and saying, my life just sucks. I mean, that's what I said, and I hate to use that crass word, but that's how I felt about it. But then I thought, when I am 18, 19 years old, and I can decide, do I want to live in domestic violence? Do I want to live in a drug atmosphere? Do I want to live in this poverty where I don't know where I'm going to eat day to day? Do I want to live in that? No. And guess what? We live in the United States of America. So nobody has an excuse. I don't care what's going on with all this political discourse and everybody and all of their politics. At the end of the day, we still live in the greatest country in this world. And in this country, you have the opportunity to do whatever it is you choose to do. But you have to make that choice. You have to decide, because every opportunity is out there for you in order for you to pursue whatever it is that you want to do. Every opportunity. You just got to be willing to get up and go get it. But it is there. So let me tell you about my journey, and let's walk through this, if you will, indulge me for a few minutes, and how this whole thing got started for me. Well, as you already heard, my parents were into drugs. And they weren't just into drugs, they were drug dealers. I mean, they ran a drug dealing enterprise. We were in Huntsville, Alabama, in a housing project there in Huntsville called Butler Terrace, and they ran multiple people that ran drugs for them all the way over to Decatur. So if you're familiar with North Alabama, you know Huntsville and Decatur, they're almost 45 minutes apart. So they were running drugs back and forth. They had guns, I mean, the full nine. It was a full-fledged operation. And, you know, here I am in this house with my parents that are drug dealers. I lived in there with my siblings. There were 5 of us. And my mother had given birth to us from age 16 to 21. And we had 4 different daddies. That's how much dysfunction I was born into. Now, there's something interesting about dysfunction, and some of you are going to see where I'm coming from on this. You know, dysfunction is relative. It's relative to whoever's experiencing it, right? Because sometimes we can be in dysfunction and not even know it. Even though ultimately something's going to happen whenever there's dysfunction. What do I mean by dysfunction? Well, I mean when a situation is just a hot mess. You know, I mean when it is just terrible and things are terrible and the situations are dangerous and all of that. That is dysfunction. And that is what I was in. But as a little kid, you know what's interesting? I didn't even know it. I mean, here I am living in my house with my parents. Both of my parents lived in the house. I didn't know they weren't married and they had this terrible relationship. I didn't care. I loved my mom and my daddy. You know, I had all my siblings in my house with me. We were crowded, you know, conditions and all of that. I had no idea we had 4 different daddies. I really didn't care. I loved my brother and my sisters. I didn't care. And then we had stuff. We had toys and all kinds of things. And I had no idea that it was coming from drug dealing money. I really didn't. And I didn't care. I mean, I was a kid. But like any situation like that, where you got drug dealing and those kinds of things going on, something is going to happen. Because I don't know about y'all, I don't know about drug dealers that retire with a 401k. I mean, it doesn't work like that. There's no retirement, there's no lifelong career in drug dealing. So eventually something's gonna happen and things are gonna go bad. And my home life was no exception. When I was 5 years old, my dad ended up getting busted for drugs. And when he got busted for drugs and went to prison, my mom was trying to hold down the drug business herself. And she broke the cardinal rule of drug dealing. She started using their product, heroin, and became a heroin addict. And for reasons unknown to me to this day, one day my mother got up and she packed up all of our clothes and she took me and my younger sister down to Clanton, Alabama, to my grandmother's house, my dad's mom. And she had adult children living there. It was a crowded situation in the housing project there in Clanton. She left us there. She took my middle sister to Hueytown, and then she took my only brother and my older sister back to her sister's house at Huntsville. And she went back to that housing project, and she went upstairs, and she took out one of their guns, and she committed suicide. So now I do know that I'm in dysfunction because my mom's dead. But I learned it in such a hard way, because the house that I was in with my grandmother, people didn't sit down and they didn't talk to adults or kids and explain what was going on and help them work through their grief. No, that wasn't my environment. I figured out what was going on by overhearing grown folks talking. You know, I don't know if any of y'all have experienced that big thing going on in your house. You don't know what's going on, but you figure it out by overhearing the grown people talking. And that's what I did. So this is what I heard. I heard things like, what was she thinking getting on those drugs like that? And what are we going to do with 5 children? How are we supposed to all come together and take care of these 5 kids? And they're trifling daddy. He's in and out of jail. He can't do anything. Blah, 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 blah. This is what I heard. And when you hear stuff like that, what do you start to think? You start to think, well, nobody wants us, or we're a burden on everybody, or whatever. And it really starts to affect whether or not you should even be here, because you're in everybody's way. And that's a bad feeling. And on top of that, that started to make me, I had my 3.5-year-old sister there, and we were separated from our older siblings. Well, I don't know if any of you have ever experienced that, but it started to make me feel like I needed to protect my sister, because I was the oldest. And we had these adults around us that kind of were acting like we were a burden, so I felt like I had to kind of protect her. So that's unfair at 5 years old, or 10, or 12, or whatever age a kid is, when they feel like they got to be a mama or a daddy figure to their younger sibling, because they feel like they have to, because the adults aren't really giving them what they need. And that was the situation I was in. And if that wasn't enough for anybody to deal with, within a month of me living in that home with my grandmother, one of her adult sons, one of my uncles, started to sexually abuse me. So that was my situation. One of the darkest times, no, not one of, the darkest time in my life. You know, mom's dead, dad's in jail. I'm actually experiencing poverty for the first time. You know, I mean, even though we were living in the housing projects in Huntsville, we had drug money. So I never knew what it was like to not have anything. I mean, there was stuff around all the time, you know? But in my grandmother, who worked hard for a living, she cleaned houses for a living, every dime mattered. And there were times where we were stretching food, trying to make food last until the first of the month when we'd get our food stamps, or standing in line to get the blocks of cheese and the flour and all of those kinds of things that she had to do to help survive. And all of a sudden, for the first time, I'm experiencing poverty, what that's like to not have. And then I'm being sexually abused. You know, the most vile thing that could ever happen to any child, female or male, because it happens both ways. Tough, tough situation. But clearly, we know I serve a pretty awesome God, or I wouldn't be standing here today. Because God used something to help me out of that situation. And He used what I believe is truly His own ministry. He used education. He used education as my tool, as my way out of that cycle of poverty. And I'm going to walk through the different ways in which the different opportunities that were there for me and how each one built on the other that got me here today. So for example, here I was, this broken child, all of that happening with the uncle. I didn't tell anybody because he threatened me, but I felt like everybody knew. I felt dirty and used and abused, and and so things were kind of tense in my neighborhood too, because we were going through integration. In West End where I live, the black school had closed down and all of the kids were being bused across town to the white school. So it was just the perfect storm of a bunch of bad things to be happening at one time. Well, there were some ladies in our community that decided, you know what, we want to make sure our kids are ready to go to school when they go to school. So we're going to open a preschool. So they opened this preschool. And there's a real important reason for me to tell you this preschool story, although y'all are in high school, and you're going to get it in a minute if you just listen and connect the dots and pay attention. So they opened this preschool up. Well, my grandma, she believed in 4 basic things. Grandma believed, 1, that you go to church every Sunday. We were there every time the door opened. She believed, 2, that you mind your elders. I learned real quick. Back then when they used to whoop the mess out of you, what happens if you don't mind your elders? So I did it. And she believed, 3, that you were clean. We may have lived in a housing project, but I promise you could have eaten off the floor. My grandma had a saying, she said, clean don't cost a dime. Anybody can be clean. And then number 4, she believed that you get an education. Now my grandmother wasn't sure about what that meant or how you do it. She did what most Americans do. She knew that she was going to send her kids to school, to public school. Well, she heard about this preschool opening and told me that I was going to go because I was of age to be able to go to the preschool. And I'll never forget, remember the state I'm in. At this point, I'm walking slumped over. I'm mumbling when I talk. I don't look up at people. I'm just this dejected child. And I go into that preschool per the instruction of my grandma that day. And I remember the first day like it was yesterday. I walked into that preschool and I looked up. The head hung, kind of looked up, and I almost smiled because I walked in there and the room was beautiful. In my eyes it was, because my house was cinder block walls and cement floor and dirt for grass in the front yard. So to walk into this fellowship hall that had been converted to a preschool that had all this colorful stuff on the walls, had little bitty desks that were just my size, and all those things made me kind of smile because it was a place where it looked like somebody kind of cared about kids, because we all ultimately want to be cared for, right? And I wasn't feeling very cared for. So I kind of smiled. But remember, I'm in this little small town, so I'm not sure how many people know my business. In Clanton, everybody knows everybody's business. And I'm thinking I'm embarrassed because they know how poor I am. They know about my mama being a drug addict and killing herself. They know about my daddy being in and out of jail. They don't know about the sexual abuse, but again, I felt like people did. And so I was really embarrassed and not even knowing how they were going to act when I went in that school. So when those preschool ladies came up to me and put their arm around me and said, come on in here, baby, I almost cried. And the reason I almost cried is because contrary to how tough some of you may act that are sitting out in this audience, we all really want to be loved. And we all really want to be treated like the age that we are. And some of us live in circumstances where we aren't. We're forced to grow up fast and to act grown and be adults and make tough adult decisions when it's not fair that we do. So God gives you this thing called a school that treats you appropriately in all of your phases of your life, so that you can develop appropriately. So even with the bad stuff going on at home, there's this place called a school. So these ladies hugged on me and loved on me, and they got on their knees and they called me by my name in a good way. And what I mean by in a good way, sometimes at home all people hear is, Liz, go do this. Liz, clean up your room. Liz, blah, blah, blah. Liz, this. Liz, come in. Liz, da, da, da. You never hear, Liz, let's sit down and talk. How was your day? Things that we want somebody to ask us and talk to us about. So all of a sudden I'm in this room with these teachers that are asking questions because they care about me. And I loved it. And what I really liked was when I did something really smart in school, they would really love on me. And if you did stuff really, really smart, they would give you prizes and stuff that you could take home. And I was like, this is a good gig. So I did so much smart stuff because I was wanting that love from those teachers that I ended up being valedictorian in my kindergarten class. And I wasn't even trying to be valedictorian in my kindergarten class. I was literally just responding to this love that these teachers were giving me. And I was just doing what they asked me to do. I had no idea that God had this plan and that I was really a bright kid academically. I didn't know that. So I was just going with the flow, just doing what the teachers expected me to do. Now let's fast forward. Now it's time for me to go to the first day of school, and it's integration. Tensions are still a little high. We're a little more adjusted at this point, but nobody knows what might happen, so people are nervous. I get up that morning, I put on my clothes, I eat my breakfast, and my grandma looks at me and she says, "Elizabeth, I want you to go over to that school and I want you to tell the teacher to put an X everywhere I need to sign on the paperwork, send it back home, and I'll send it back tomorrow." So it dawned on me, my grandma's about to send me to this school by myself. And I'm 6 years old. Y'all, I was terrified. I was scared. But I was more scared of my grandma, so I got my butt on that bus so I could go across town, because I didn't play with my grandma now. You just didn't do that. So I get on the bus to go across town. And this is what's important here. Because here's where this part of my story tells you that there's no excuse. First, you have to take advantage of what you have. And then you have to know how to use what you've learned to survive, to make a difference for yourself. You got to make that decision. So here's what happened. So I get off the bus, I walk into the elementary school, I don't know what to do. I look on the wall and I saw first grade. And I read it and thought to myself, well, I'm going to the first grade, I must be in the right place. Well, how did I know it said first grade? Because of that preschool. I didn't learn that at home. I learned that in that preschool. So I stood there a little longer. I didn't know what to do. They had the homeroom list up on the wall. Parents were coming in with their children, and they would scroll down the list and say, "Oh, little Susie, you're in such and such's room." And I thought, well, my name's got to be up there. I'm going to the first grade. So I got on my tippy toes and I scrolled up and down that list until I found my name, and I saw what room I was supposed to go into. Now, how did I know how to read, write, and spell my name? How did I know how to read room numbers to know to move from room to room? Why? Because of that preschool. So I had taken advantage of something that I had been taught to help me take another step in my life. So I go into the classroom, the first grade classroom, and I sit at the front desk because the ladies at the preschool told me don't nothing good happen in the back of the classroom. When you get your butt over there, you better sit in the front desk. So I sat in the front desk of this classroom. Now, you all know what happens on the first day of school. This was back when first grade was everybody's first day of school. Black, white, rich, poor, it didn't matter. Everybody was going to their first day. So you have some kids crying, holding on to their mom and don't want to go. You have some kids don't want to let go of their dolls. You have parents standing around the room trying to get the kids. You have some parents not wanting to let go of the kids. I mean, you got all these things going on in the room, and the teacher's dealing with all these things in the room. Now think about that room, and there I sat in the front desk, just sitting there, sitting up straight, waiting on class to start, I guess, because I didn't know what to do. But that's what I did at school every day. I went in there, I sat down, and I sat up straight. Well, it seemed like an eternity had passed, but it was only a few minutes. Eventually, the teacher started to walk towards me. Now, I'm going to tell you, when this lady started walking towards me, my heart started to race. Not because I was scared of her, but because she had dark hair, colorful eyes, and a beautiful smile, and she looked just like Wonder Woman. I'm not kidding you. She looked like Wonder Woman, and I'm not talking about that new-looking Wonder Woman. I'm talking about the old-school Miss Universe Linda Carter Wonder Woman. Y'all have seen her, right? Y'all know who I'm talking about. So the Wonder Woman show was on during that time, and I used to watch it. It came on TV at night, and I used to watch Wonder Woman, and I used to think one day she was going to come with the gold cuffs and the rope and save me from the bad people, right? I mean, I'm only 6 years old. So when she started walking towards me, I was thinking in my little mind, could this be? Is my teacher Wonder Woman? Like, how cool would that have been? Well, it wasn't Wonder Woman, it was Miss Pam Jones. But she was my Wonder Woman, because let me tell you what happened next. So she comes up to me with that lovely smile, and looks down at me in the eyes and says, "Well, hello, young lady, what is your name?" Well, y'all, I panicked. I didn't know what to do. What did I know about registering myself for school, right? So all that could come out of my mouth was, "My name's Elizabeth Humphrey. My grandma told me to tell you to put an X everywhere she needs to sign on the paperwork, send the paper back home, and I'll bring it back tomorrow." I just spit it out because I had rehearsed it over and over and over again because that's what my grandma told me to do when I got to school. So Miss Pam Jones stopped, and we had a little discussion back and forth about how I had found my way into that classroom. And so many things could have happened in that moment. And y'all know it could have. That could have changed the course of time. Miss Pam Jones could have said, "I'm calling DHR. I can't believe your grandmother would send you to school by yourself," and made a big deal out of that. And guess what? Miss Pam Jones would have been justified to do that. Because God rest my grandma's soul, she was wrong to send me to school at 6 years old by myself. Or Miss Pam Jones could have said, "I've got this classroom full of parents and kids. I don't have time to deal with this. You need to go to the office and let Miss Charlotte handle this." She could have done that. She could have passed me off to somebody else. And guess what? Miss Pam Jones would have been justified because she had a class going on. You know, it was wrong for my grandmother to send me to school by myself. Or Miss Pam Jones could have done the third thing that would have been the worst thing that could have happened to me. Miss Pam Jones could have had personal biases against people. And I don't mean just based on race. So many people are biased against people based on where they come from, who their mom and daddies are, what side of town they live on. Have nothing to do with skin color. And she could have brought those biases with her into the classroom and decided that I was one of those children, and she could have just pushed me off to the side. Worst thing that could have happened to me. But instead, and I truly believe God was working through her in this moment, Miss Pam Jones saw my glass as half full, not half empty. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, when somebody sees your glass as half full, they're only looking at the bad stuff. So she could have looked at the no parents and going to school by myself and all of those kinds of things and oh, poor pitiful child, and made a big deal about the bad stuff that was happening in my life. Or what she did was saw my glass as half full. What she saw was amazement that this little child had found her way into the classroom, and seeing resilience and seeing bravery and all of those things that were going on right there. She saw my potential. And in doing so, with tears in her eyes, Miss Pam Jones looked me in the face and she said, "Elizabeth Humphrey, you're going to be the brightest student I ever have." Let that sink in for a second. Some of you out there have had teachers or people in your community or people in your church that have spoken words to you like that, that have seen your potential, that are ready, willing, and able to help you to be the best person that you can be. So what you have to decide, like I had to in that moment with Miss Pam Jones, was I going to rise to the challenge? So when she told me I was going to be the brightest student she ever had, I thought, oh, well, this is just like preschool. If I just do smart stuff, she'll love on me. And that's what I did. And in fact, that lady still loves on me. When I was giving birth to Sarah Beth, that y'all met today, she was at my house keeping my oldest daughter. And even when I gave birth to the child I hadn't mentioned yet, my 2-year-old son, yes, I have a 2-year-old son. God has a sense of humor too. But anyway, even when I gave birth to that 2-year-old son, she was the first person in the driveway to hold him. Now, she may have been there because she was like, I can't believe this child just had a baby at her age. But, you know, either way, she was there. She was the first person there. Brought me a precious gift that I'll cherish for the rest of my life. And she was then, and she always will be, my Wonder Woman. And I will tell you something else. Miss Pam Jones, who was Miss Pam Hill, is from Brewton, Alabama. That's where she's from. And Miss Pam Jones, I told you, is always there for the rest of my life. She is here with me today. Y'all, please recognize my first grade teacher, my Wonder And according to her, I'm still the brightest student she ever had. So we're going to keep that record, right? She is definitely my Wonder Woman, has never missed a major milestone in my life, has always been there. And I tell you that story and demonstrate with her being here today that you have no excuse. If you're in a school, everybody may not be perfect, but I promise you, teachers are not there because they're getting rich. You know how I know? I'm married to one, and I see his paycheck every month. And teachers are not trying to get rich to come in here and teach you. They have to be in here because they care about kids, and they want to see you succeed, and they want to see you make something out of yourself. So you've got to decide, am I going to take advantage of what's being offered to me through my teachers, people in your community? You have a communities of transformation, really? You know, people out there that are actively working to make sure you all have opportunity? That's amazing. You know, for me, through my YMCA, through the Kiwanis Club, having an oral contest that helped me do some things that led to scholarships, to all kinds of programs, even my track coach and the discipline that I learned through track, and my cheer coach and the things that I learned from her about how I can do anything anybody else can do. All of those things are things that are going to help you rise up and rise out to be exactly what it is that you want to be. But you have to be willing to take advantage of it. You know, I'll give you another example. When I was in the 6th grade, I had this teacher named Mr. Art Smith. Now, by way of background here, let me give you a little background. So Miss Pam Jones was so determined to make sure that she taught me everything that she could teach me, that by the time I left out of 1st grade, I was reading on like a 4th, 5th grade level when I left out of 1st grade. So that instilled a love for reading for me. So I read all the time. But I had started when I got to middle school, I wasn't sure what to read anymore. So I started reading things like Stephen King and Dean Koontz, and y'all know Stephen King, right? So that's all the gory, scary stuff. And I read that for 2 reasons. 1, somebody's life was worse than mine. And 2, it gave me a way to escape because, you know, by middle school, my home situation had gotten worse. My grandmother had another son to move in with us, and he was a paranoid schizophrenic. Things would get so violent in my house at times that, you know, everything would get out of control. Law enforcement would be called, DHR would come out, we would have to go in and out of foster care. It was just a roller coaster ride. I mean, you never knew if a bad incident happened the night before. When you got off the bus from school and you go home, you don't know if DHR is going to be waiting in the driveway to take you off. It was that kind of a roller coaster ride. But I knew I had the advocates at school. That was the one place where I knew these people had my best interest at heart. So Mr. Art, but I read these books because things were so bad, it let me kind of escape into this weird reality. So Mr. Art Smith, let me describe him to you. He was a white male, about 5'1". He was retired military. He wore black horn-rimmed glasses. He always wore dark pants and a light button-down shirt, pocket protector. Are y'all getting the picture? And y'all see Mr. Smith in your mind? But he, in spite of him being such a tough disciplinarian and a hard man, he was a dynamic teacher. He was a history teacher. And, you know, with his experiences with military and everything, he would bring things to life for us in a way that was exciting. I mean, we love being in Mr. Art Smith's class. And I'm sure y'all have teachers like that you love being in their class. And so I used to read all the time, and I always had a book with me. And one day, the bell rang for us to change classes. And Mr. Smith said, "Elizabeth, come here." So I got a little nervous. I didn't know what was going on. So, "Yes, sir, Mr. Smith." Well, like I said, I always had a book in my hand. Well, that day I happened to have a Stephen King book in my hand. And he looked at me and he pointed at the book and he said, "Why are you always reading that crap?" And I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Smith?" He's like, "Why are you always reading that crap? Every time I see you, you've got books in your hand and they're always a bunch of crap." And I said, "Well," that's how he talked. That was just Mr. Smith. And I said, "Well, Mr. Smith, what do you want me to read?" And this is what he said. He said, "Elizabeth, you have so much potential." He said, "You need to be reading about ordinary people that did amazing things." He said, "You need to be reading biographies." Well, I didn't even know what a biography was, but I knew that because Mr. Smith told me I better read them, I knew I had to go to the library and get one. Now, years later, when I'd gone to college and come back home, I saw Mr. Smith at a restaurant, and I asked him, I said, Mr. Smith, why did you do that day? I said, why did you stop me after class and told me I had to start reading biographies? And Mr. Smith got choked up. And I'm telling you this story because some of you have teachers that truly love you if you would just let them. They want to care for you. They really do want to help you. If you would take that wall down and let them in, they can help you. And so Mr. Smith, he got choked up and he said, Elizabeth, I knew you had so much potential, but here I was, a white male, you were a black teenage girl. I really wasn't sure how we would relate and how I could reach out and help you. So I thought that if you read biographies about people that had grown up in rough times and made it out, that somehow might help you and encourage you to stay the course and make it out. Think about that. That took a lot, and I want y'all to think back to moments when your teachers have reached out to you in a way that Mr. Smith didn't have to do that. I mean, I went to his class every day. He was a great teacher. I had good grades. There was no trouble or anything. He had no reason to go beyond doing that for me other than he cared. And he cared about me and cared about my future. And so I did what Mr. Art Smith said, and I went to the library, and naturally I wanted to read about African Americans, so I went and asked Miss Allred, first of all, what a biography was, and then I went to the section with African Americans. And for those of you that know this author in this book, you'll understand how important this is. The very first book that I picked up off that shelf was Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And that is a story about a young African American woman who went through the same types of things that I went through. And to read that story and to see where life had brought her and where she was, it was so motivating to me. And then I started reading biographies all the time because I wanted to read about people like me that were struggling with things that I was struggling with. And it meant so much to me. It really did. And so it even taught me that I wanted to be a lawyer because I learned to read these biographies that all the major things that happen in society happen through the practice of law. And I wanted to be a part of that. So it made me decide I want to go to law school. They are there to help you. They are to help you. You've got to decide if you want to take advantage of it, and you've got to decide if you want to define you. You already have a community that's ready, willing, and able to help you. Now you got to decide if you want to use it, or you can just stay in your little rut for the rest of your life, and it's your fault. You cannot blame your circumstances, not in this country. There are certain countries where you're born, that's where you're stuck, but not in America. The opportunity is yours. You know, I'll tell you this one, and this is kind of an important one, because sometimes we think teachers are offending us, like somehow they don't understand our struggle or what we're going through, when really they may be trying to help us. I remember when I was in the 8th grade, I had an English teacher. Her name was Miss Myrtle Littleton. Now, by way of background, Miss Myrtle Littleton was from Great Britain, and she spoke British, and we didn't understand a thing she said, you know? But she was a good English teacher, and as always, I made straight A's in her class. Well, one day I get a call to the office, and I go in the office, and there sat Miss Myrtle Littleton, my school administrator, and my grandma. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, what's happening here? Well, Miss Littleton started the conference, and she started with this. She said, Elizabeth, you have so much potential. She said, but I'm afraid that the way that you talk might hold you back from being as successful as I believe you can be. Now, what did she mean by that? Well, I grew up in West End, in the projects. I spoke in Ebonics. I mean, instead of for, I said fo. Instead of this, I said dis. You know, I mean, I just spoke the way people in my neighborhood spoke. Didn't think anything of it. And so when she said that to me and talked about wanting to put me in speech therapy to correct it, I have to be honest about something. I had just finished reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. So I was feeling a little militant. So when she came at me talking about the way that I talked, I immediately got defensive, and I was like, what's wrong with the way that I talk? What's wrong with being black? Are you trying to take me away from my culture? Blah, 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 blah. Well, then my grandma looked at me across the room and shut it down. Because I didn't play with my grandma. I told you now, I didn't play with grandma. So she shut it down. But there's another part to that story that's so important. So that explains why I talk the way I talk. Sometimes on the phone, people think I'm a white woman. You know, and I get that all the time. But there's another piece of that story that's important. And I want the teachers to hear this. Sometimes, in a well-meaning intention, whether you're a community leader reaching out to a kid or a teacher reaching out to a kid, sometimes if you don't weigh the totality of what's going to happen, it could actually hurt a kid. So here's what was going on with me with the speech therapy thing. The only thing I had good going for me in my life at that point was that I was a smart kid in school. Everybody thought Liz was the smart kid. That was it. You know, that was my thing. Everything else was pure hell, and I mean pure hell. So school was my little place. Well, the speech therapy room that Miss Littleton wanted to send me to, and I know T.R. Miller has one, every school has one, there's some place in the school where all the cool kids hang out, right? Where all the athletes stand on the wall and everybody walks by in their cute little outfits and you get all the gossip from the weekend. I mean, there's always a place in every school that has one. So in my school at the time, that place, the speech therapy room was right at that intersection. And not only was the speech therapy room there, but above it in big bold letters, it said speech therapy. So what was my problem? I was scared to go in that room. Why? Because I was scared of what my peers were going to think. I was scared that the one good thing that I had that people could say about me was that I was smart. How somehow they wouldn't think that anymore when they saw me walking through that door that said speech therapy. You know how kids can be, right? I mean, that's what I was thinking. And that terrified me about going through that whole process. It wasn't so much about taking the course. It was about the impact it was going to have on me in that school. So I went to the library and I was crying because, you know, my grandma said, you're doing it. You know, Miss Littleton said you're doing it. And even though it was something that was good for me, it was going to be bad in a way because of me. And so I went to the library and I saw Miss Allred and I was crying and I was like, Miss Allred, I don't know what I'm going to do. Miss Littleton's going to put me in speech therapy. You know, I got to go to that door every day and the kids aren't going to think I'm smart anymore, blah, 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 blah. I mean, I'm just crying. I'm so upset about this. And she looked at me and she said, well, Elizabeth, calm down. She said, first of all, I do think you need speech therapy. She said, but here's what we're going to do. She said, you can go into speech therapy every day through the back of the library. And that way, nobody will ever know that you're going to speech therapy. Do you all realize how important that was for me? Y'all are teenagers. There's certain things that have to be handled in a certain way if people are sensitive to your situation that makes it okay. So what did I do? I went to speech therapy through the library every day, and nobody ever knew that I was in speech therapy. And that's why I sound the way that I talk today. I mean, like I said, I know I get it all the time. You know, people talk to me on the phone, and they'll get to know me on the phone, and then I'll finally meet them in person, and I'll say, hey, I'm Liz Huntley, and they'll say, hey. You know what they're thinking, right? They've been talking to me on the phone, and they assume that I'm white. But my ability to be able to communicate the way that I can now is not only helpful for me to be able to talk to you today, but I'm a lawyer. I get in front of juries for a living. I get in front of judges for a living. My ability to communicate is key to my professional success. So it's been a tremendous asset that helped me, even though had Ms. Allred not handled it delicately in light of my whole situation, could have hurt me in a way. So I tell the story from both sides. To the students, I say, you know, you take advantage of those things that are going to improve you, but be open about any reservations you have about it and what it is, And to the teachers and the administrators, I say, recognize the entire impact on the child when decisions are being made by the child, from home to school, because things affect children in different ways, or teenagers as it is in your case. So I'll tell you that story, and then I'm going to close with one last thing, because this is important. And I hope you all will read the book, and your counselor and I are talking about some other things with the ninth graders, and we'll see how that goes. And hopefully I can continue to help in some kind of way as you all go on your journey to finding who you are. But the name of my book is More Than a Bird. And you'd say, why would you call it More Than a Bird? Well, I'm going to explain to you why. When I was in the 3rd grade, I'll never forget this, the last day of school. Well, for me, going home for the summer wasn't like it is for my children. There wasn't vacations and planning college camps and all these things that they get to do. When I went home for the summer, that was it. I mean, until I got old enough to work a job, you were just at home. And for me, that wasn't pleasant, y'all. Being at my home 24/7 for 2.5 months all summer long was not a fun thing because of the violence, the sexual abuse, all the stuff that I had to deal with on a regular basis. You know, it wasn't fun. So I get on the bus, and as the bus is pulling away from the school, and I see my school fading away in the distance, I started to cry. And I'm here to tell you, I didn't just cry, I wept. I mean, I cried hard because I was leaving the one place where I felt safe. I knew a meal would always be on the table, and I felt loved. And I hated leaving that school for the summer. I absolutely hated it. And I went into this depression, and when I say a depression, I'm talking about, I actually thought about committing suicide, because you think, what's the point of living if this is my life, if this is the hand I've been dealt? So 2 weeks after that, my aunt invited me to this church with her for a Wednesday night Bible study. Now, I'll be honest, now y'all heard me say, my grandma, we were in church every Sunday, but we didn't have children's church, we didn't have Bible school, so I really didn't have a relationship with God, didn't really know about God. You know, because at my grandma's church, the preacher would get so animated and everything, and the ladies would get so emotional, I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I just sat there. So I just sat there through church and really didn't get anything. And so she asked me to go to this Bible study with her, and the only reason I went was because it got me out of my house at night, because bad things happen in my house at night. So I went with her to this Bible study. And the very first thing the preacher said is, I want everybody to get out your Bibles. And if you don't have one, one will be handed to you. Well, I had never really read the Bible. But because of Wonder Woman and all of my teachers, I could read, and I could read well. So they handed me this Bible, and that night we're going through all these stories of hope and about this God that did all these amazing things for these people that went through all these troubles. And I was just fascinated as I'm reading this book. And then we ended that night with the story of Joseph. And I don't know how many of y'all know about the story of Joseph, but Joseph's family, that was a hot mess. I mean, that was a dysfunctional family if I ever saw one. So Joseph, if you don't know, Joseph had a whole bunch of brothers, and they had a bunch of baby mamas. And he was the baby. And he was the baby, and he was Daddy's favorite. And Daddy made sure everybody knew that he was Daddy's favorite, to the point of even buying him this beautiful coat of many colors. So Joseph's strutting around in his little coat, and the brothers are getting more and more jealous of him. Then Joseph ends up having this dream where he's ruling over everybody, including his older brothers. And he's bragging about this dream and telling them about it. And they get furious with Joseph. They get so furious that they end up selling Joseph into slavery in Egypt. So Joseph ends up going into slavery, young teenage boy. He's in prison, he's beaten in prison. Then they find out he's really smart. He gets out of prison. Then he won't have an affair with this lady, so he has to go back to prison. And I'm sitting there reading this going, my gosh, this is a mess. But at the end of that beautiful story, God had elevated Joseph as governor of Egypt. After all of that stuff, that bad stuff that Joseph had gone through, sold by his brothers, I mean, terrible things, he ended up being governor of Egypt. And you know what happened when he was elevated to that point? Not only did he save his family from famine and starvation, he saved 2 nations from famine and starvation. And I'm sitting there, this broken child with no hope, and I'm reading with my own eyes and listening to this story about Joseph. And I thought to myself, if this God can help Joseph, and he went through all this bad stuff, maybe he can help me. So that next Wednesday, I couldn't wait to get back to that church. I mean, I wanted to read that book, that story, with the book with all the stories of hope in it and everything. I was ready to get back. And I went back that next Wednesday, and that night we went through several scriptures, but we ended with Matthew 6:26. And I'm going to paraphrase it. I'm going to summarize it for you instead of quoting it directly. It says that if God will take care of the birds, then he'll take care of his children. Are they not better than a bird? Scripture even talks about how birds, they don't even store things up to keep stuff. You know why? Because birds get it. They get it better than we do. That's why birds tweet, tweet, tweet all the time. I mean, birds know. Think about it. Birds are like, man, I ain't got nothing to worry about. God got those two-legged human people. You see them out there? They gonna take care of us. I mean, they are obsessed with us. They build bird houses. They build bird baths. They have bird books. They do bird watching. You know, if you sit in the park or in the parking lot of a restaurant, they'll start throwing you their food. We ain't got to worry about nothing. Those two-legged human people are going to take care of us. Birds get it. And so if God will take care of the birds that way, using humans, do you not think he's going to take care of his children? Human beings made after his own likeness? So I sat there and I thought to myself, in all my broken state and vile things that were happening to me, and I thought, I've got to be more than a bird. I have to be, you know? And then God gave me my evidence that I was more than a bird. Because in spite of all of the dark, terrible things that were happening to me in my home, God had given me my school. And he had given me a place where he provided people to love me. And all I had to do was take advantage of it. He put it right there, right next to all of the terrible things that were happening. And I realized then that God did love me. And I had to be more than a bird because he had given me my school. And that was my opportunity to have a better life as an adult. And faith came into my heart that night, and I professed Christ. And then I began my journey, my spiritual journey of growing spiritually. And I stayed on my natural journey here on earth through school and education to help bring the two together to shape me into the woman that I am today. And I wouldn't be here without either of those things, because they're truly who I am. And those things together are why I'm more than a bird. And those things, I hope that you learn from me today will let you know that you're more than a bird. Because if you don't have anything else, you have a school, you have a place of refuge, and you have a place where you can grow if you take care of the opportunities that are standing right in front of you. I wish all of you the best. To the seniors, Godspeed. To the beautiful people in this community that have come out to bring this together, to send this message to the students, thank you for letting me be a little part of your community today. And to the mayor, thank you for the key. I'll stop by Regions Bank on the way out. And to my sweet daughter, thank you for traveling with me today. And to my Wonder Woman, you always will be my Wonder Woman. And so many of you have a Wonder Woman or a Wonder Man, we'll call him Superman, in your life. You just got to be willing to let him use the superpowers. Thank y'all so much. Y'all